but the topic tonight is body autonomy. And we're going to talk about what that means and why it's an important topic. You can go to the next page. Okay, so what is body autonomy? It's the idea that children, even very young children and babies, have a right to govern what happens to their body. And I want to be clear that we're not talking about dangerous situations, right? Like obviously, if a child is about to run into the street, please grab them, please grab them without their permission, right? If they're holding something sharp or hot, they're about to touch something hot, always choose the child's safety. But I'm talking about things like hugging relatives, right? Playing with friends, those types of things, right? Children have a right to say who gets to touch their body and who doesn't. And children who grow up with a sense of body autonomy are less likely to be abused or recognize abuse if it happens to them. They're more likely to grow up confident and assured of themselves. And it really teaches consent and respect from a very young age, which is important as they get older. So why is it important? And a little trigger warning here, we're going to go into some statistics that can be kind of scary for parents to hear about abuse. But 1 out of every 4 women report sexual abuse before the age of 18. So a quarter of women report this, and 1 in 14 men. And honestly, these numbers are actually probably much higher, I think, especially for men and boys. This is only what's reported. So this is why body autonomy is so important, because we want to lower that number. It's way too high. And teaching kids about consent in terms that they understand from a young age makes it a lot easier to understand later in life. If a child is abused and they have the appropriate language to talk about it, it makes it much easier as well to hold a perpetrator accountable. So going into some of these statistics, and again, I know these numbers are scary, but it's important. So of all victims under 18, 2 out of 3 were between the ages of 12 and 17. So those preteen, early teen years are really important and crucial, right? If you have a child within that age range, it's really important to have these conversations with them. I recommend having them even earlier than that, but especially that age range, that's where abuse is actually most likely to take place. And the child often knows the perpetrator. There's this idea sometimes we hear about stranger danger. And of course, we should teach children to be wary of strangers and to be cautious, but 93% of perpetrators were known to the victim. They were family members, right? Family friends, teachers, coaches, religious figures, those types of things, right? Those types of relationships with the children. And 93% is huge. Right? This number can be very scary. So another one that's really important, another statistic, is that 55% of sexual assault actually occurs at the victim's home or very nearby. So again, the majority, right? It also can happen other places, a relative's home, a friend's home, open space, school. However, it's most likely to happen at home. And that can be really upsetting, right, to think about. So this is why it's such an important topic, because like I said, children who have a sense of body autonomy, who know what appropriate versus inappropriate touch feels like, they understand who's allowed and not allowed to touch their body, those children are less likely to be abused. And we really want to lower these numbers. It's very sad. So some other risk factors to take into consideration is that transgender and gender nonconforming teens and young adults are actually much more likely to be sexually assaulted or abused. It's actually like 4 times more likely. So if you know of kids who are gender nonconforming, or if you have a transgender or gender nonconforming child or teen, you really should know that number and be on the lookout for people around them, and also let them know that they're at higher risk and they should be really cautious about who they let close to them and who they let in their lives. But also children with learning disabilities or neurodiversity may be more vulnerable to abuse because they tend to be a little bit more naive. And victims of sexual abuse are 4 times more likely to become addicted to substance later in life. They're 4 times more likely to experience PTSD as adults. And they're 3 times more likely to experience a major depressive episode as an adult. So this, right, these are the reasons we want to talk about this topic, even though I know it can be really uncomfortable sometimes for parents. We want to lower these numbers. We don't want any child to experience abuse and grow up having some of these things happen to them, becoming addicted or suffering from severe depression. So the best way to prevent abuse is to talk to your kids. And I really like this video. It's kind of lighthearted around the topic, but I think it gives some good examples. So let's just watch it.
Where do babies come from?
What's a period?
Why does my penis grow in the morning?
Why can't boys wear dresses?
Why don't I have a penis?
Can you get pregnant the first time you have sex?
Why get boobs? Where do babies come from?
Look, a bird.
Check Wikipedia.com.
Wiki what?
Spermatozoa formed in the testes, enter the caput epididymis, progresses to the corpus, and finally reaches the cauda region, where they are stored.
Huh?
How do you know if you're gay?
You're gay?
Michelle kissed me at recess.
She did what?
Why does my penis stand up?
Ask your mother.
Ask your father.
Ask her again.
How would I know? I don't have a penis.
What's a period?
A type of punctuation. You need to pay better attention in English class.
Can you get pregnant the first time you have sex?
Not if you don't have it, which you never will.
Can I get birth control?
No.
No.
Nope.
No. No, 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 no. Did you have sex at my age?
That's a great question.
Can you tell me what you already know about that? I'm not sure. Let's look that up.
So I like that video, right? It's funny. I think a lot of parents can relate, right? Sometimes these questions are scary or we don't know how to answer. We're afraid to give an answer that's too graphic or not age appropriate, right? But I just really want to encourage parents to have these conversations with their kids. Knowledge is power for both parents and children. So let's talk a little bit about body autonomy and what that looks like in practice. So a great example is really just teaching kids the correct anatomical names for their genitals and private parts from a really early age. I know it can feel embarrassing sometimes, and some of us didn't grow up with that example, right? We were told some sort of silly name for our private parts. But the thing is, it's just like saying ear, nose, neck, mouth, eye, right? And the thing is that children who know the correct names of their genitals are actually less likely to be abused. Abusers are often looking for kids who are naive in some way and maybe don't know the correct words. And the other thing is that adults who overhear children use the correct word are much more likely to ask follow-up questions if they suspect that something is wrong, right? For example, if I were in a classroom with a bunch of first graders and a first grader said, "My uncle touched my cookie," I might not question that, right? But if a first grader said, my uncle touched my vagina, I would say, please tell me more, right? I would really question that. I would wonder what was going on, right? I would be more curious. So this is part of why it's so important to teach kids the correct anatomical name. So some other examples of how to do this in practice is it's pretty simple. Sometimes just asking kids if they want a hug instead of just giving them one, or telling them to hug their relatives. You can offer other options such as a wave, a high five, a thumbs up if a child doesn't want to hug a relative. And then prompting children to ask others to engage in play or engage in touches, right? Just checking in, saying, oh, does so-and-so want a hug, right? Ask them first. Again, one of the best ways is to do this at home, right? Practice this at home. You can play games too, like red light, green light, where kids practice listening for cues such as, stop and go. Asking kids again, if they want hugs, if they want to give hugs to relatives, and asking your relatives to ask too. Don't just assume that they get a hug immediately or that they get to touch the child immediately. Have the relative ask. And if a child does say no to a specific touch, always respect their no. You can offer other alternatives, like we suggested, high fives, thumbs up, blowing a kiss, something like that. But if a child still says no, just respect their no, right? Nobody's going to die if grandma doesn't get a hug, right? I know sometimes that relatives can have feelings about that, but ultimately it's better to let the child have that autonomy where they get to decide who touches them and who doesn't. So teach kids how to say no, right? Help them practice and let them know that it's okay to say no, even to you. This is how they practice saying it to other people when it's important. So some other ways to say no are things like, that's enough, stop, all done. And sometimes kids want to say no as part of play, right? We've all probably been in that position where we're like tickling a kid who's like, yes, tickle me, right? And then they're screaming, no, 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 stop. Right. So helping kids understand what's a playful no versus a serious no. And sometimes differentiating phrases can be helpful, right? Like if they're all done with being tickled, they can say all done, right? Instead of just parroting no, no, no over and over. And you can practice this using games like tickling, right? Tell me when to stop, tell me when to go with the tickling. So talking about appropriate versus inappropriate touch with children is another good way to practice this kind of conversation. So appropriate touch should feel comforting, supportive, fun. Inappropriate touch often feels confusing. It can feel bad, sad, or mad. And a phrase I like to use with kids and adults is, the question is the answer. If you are questioning how touch makes you feel, trust the questioning, right? If you're wondering, was that inappropriate touch? I don't know, I didn't like it, but I'm not sure what they meant, right? That's not usually a good sign. If you're questioning how somebody made you feel, you should trust that and maybe look into it a little bit more. So a phrase I like to use with kids as well, especially elementary school, is the uh-oh feeling, right? How do we know when I feel unsafe in my body? So it can feel like a couple different ways, and it's really helpful for young children especially to help them make that connection between the mind and the body. How do I know when I'm feeling bad or sad or mad? What does it feel like in my body, and how do I know? So it can feel like your hair is standing up on end, right? You can start to cry. Maybe you feel sweaty. Maybe you have goosebumps. Maybe your heart is beating really, really fast. Maybe you feel sick to your stomach. Maybe you feel shaky or like you have to go to the bathroom. Maybe you have wobbly legs. And if a child is feeling these types of feelings around anyone, that they should tell a trusted adult, and they should have a safety network of adults that they can tell, not just mom and dad, but other people too, teachers, counselors, other relatives, things like that. So inappropriate touch, again, is unfortunately much more likely to come from a known person than a stranger. So people like coaches, religious figures, babysitters, relatives, teachers, etc. And let children know that inappropriate touch can come from anyone and it's never their fault. Reassure that they will never get in trouble for saying that any adult made them uncomfortable. They have to feel safe to come to you and let you know if they are feeling unsafe or if somebody is touching them inappropriately. So I want to touch on corporal punishment, things like spanking, hitting, pinching, right? Because the thing is, it actually does rob children of their body autonomy because they're being touched against their will in a hurtful way. And it's our job as adults to find other ways to discipline children, such as lessening screen time or giving them natural consequences for their misbehaviors, grounding them, right? Taking away dessert, things like that, but not using their body to punish them because it does increase the risk for them to be abused by other adults. It just does. So it's not the most effective way to discipline children, and it puts them at a much higher risk for abuse. Some warning signs to look out for, and we're going to go into more detail about some of these later. But if a child is displaying inappropriate or sexualized dress, that can be a warning sign that they may have been abused. Referring to sexual topics or knowing age inappropriate words or phrases is also a sign. Or inappropriate sexualized play with themselves or others. On the next slide, we're going to show a picture. So a little trigger warning, not a picture of anything graphic, but a picture of a child's play who did experience some sexual abuse. So this is some play that a child did for me, right? We were in the classroom and they put their Barbies like this, right? And so I asked, right? I said, oh, tell me what Barbie and Ken are doing, right? I didn't assume necessarily, even though that gave me a bad feeling, right? I was like, uh-oh, this doesn't look good, right? And this was with a 3-year-old child. So this is inappropriate, right? Obviously, this child, it seemed to me, had potentially seen something that she shouldn't have seen. So I asked her some questions and she said some phrases that a 3-year-old should never know. And that to me was enough of a warning sign to be an abuse report, right? So I had to report to the authorities that there was suspected child abuse going on in her home. But this is the type of thing, right? If you see this kind of play going on, especially with a very young child, ask questions. Right? You don't necessarily know because she could have said they're wrestling, right? And that would have been innocent enough and it wouldn't have necessarily been a red flag. But because of the words that she used to describe what they were doing, I knew something bad had happened. So another video, and this one is also kind of lighthearted, but I like this because it shows some good examples of body autonomy in action. So let's watch.
So I say, my vagina.
My rules.
My vagina.
My rules.
My vagina.
My rules.
Or my body.
My body.
My rules.
Okay, so I'm going to read you the types of touches on these cards, and then you're going to tell me who you would feel most comfortable with doing these to you.
Are you embarrassed to say it?
Touching your butt.
Like in what kind of way?
Slapping it.
She was probably 4, and we were at a photo shoot.
Like,
and she was hired to be the child, and then the doctor was had to do like a stomach examination.
I guess a parent then.
parent.
Yeah.
He went to go pull down her pants, and she goes, my vagina, my rules.
Touching your genitalia.
I guess at this age, no one.
No one. Good answer, I like that. No one ever. Even like when you get a girlfriend.
You don't want to be a grandparent?
No. He looked at me, she's like, is it okay? He explained that it was just a tiny bit below her belly button. He asked her if it was okay, and she said it was okay.
No. Mother, I wish you never tickled me. Please, stop.
So you know when you're getting tickled, and sometimes it feels really fun and exciting.
No!
Oh, you doubled up.
Do you know that feeling when it kind of feels too much and all of a sudden you're all done?
No!
Kind of like a, uh-oh.
Uh-oh. No, please. Please stop. Please, you're hurting me.
When you were able to say stop and move away from it, how did that make you feel?
I paused for a moment. I was like, I'm doing the uh-oh feeling.
At some point during the tickle, you didn't want to participate anymore, right? So how could you have let mommy know that you didn't want to participate anymore? When you have that feeling, what are you going to say?
Stop.
Yeah.
So does that make sense?
Can we do another tickle fight?
Can I boop your nose?
Can I steal your necklace?
Can I pat your head and rub your tummy? Can I annihilate you?
Definitely not.
There are 6 of you, so we're going to have to figure out where.
Exactly.
Yes,
Hi,
it is.
Camera.
So why do the three of you think that it's important to ask before we touch somebody?
Because they might not want you to touch them. Their personal space bubble can get bigger or smaller.
Do you like hugs when you're sad?
Depends on the level of sadness.
So sometimes I really like hugs when I'm sad, and I usually assume other people want hugs if they're sad. So if I see you crying, it's probably not a good idea for me to just walk up and hug you, even though that's what I would want if I was sad, right? Because that doesn't always work. Does that make sense?
Group hug?
I like that video because it gives great examples, right, of kids saying no and practicing saying no. Oh, my cat just said no. And I think it shows a good example too that people want different things, right? Sometimes that, like that little boy said, oh, maybe I want a hug depending on my level of sadness, right? So we shouldn't assume that just because a child looks sad or is having some kind of feeling that they want touch, right? People are different, so it's good to ask. So let's talk a little bit about appropriate touch. This can also come from anyone, right? But it may come from a relative, a doctor, or a friend. It's always consensual. It's asked and then given permission. And it's normal to like some touch from some people, but not others, right? For example, a child may like a kiss from their parent, but not from somebody else, right? Part of the reason I like that video is they give those examples in the beginning. Who would you like this touch from, right? And he could say, the child said, nobody, right? The mom was like, even a girlfriend? You know, and he kind of gave a silly answer. But the point is, sometimes we like touch from some people and sometimes we don't, right? Or maybe we want this kind of touch from someone and not from someone else. So some examples of appropriate touch, right? What it may look like. It can look like a soft pat on the back, right? A teacher tying your shoe, a high five or a fist bump, a doctor giving you an exam with your parents' consent and while they are present. A doctor should not ask parents to leave the room unless the child is past a certain age. And even then they should ask the child if that's okay, right? The child, parents and children should not be separated like that without the child's consent. So questions I get a lot about what's normal behavior, right? We talked a little bit about some warning signs, but what is normal? It is not abnormal for children to explore their own bodies or touch themselves, even at a young age. Helping them understand their own body actually will help them learn appropriate boundaries for themselves and others. So you can help kids with this if you see, for example, your child touching themselves in the bath, right? You can say, oh, usually we do that in private, right? Let me give you a couple minutes of privacy, or just tell them that we do that in privacy, like in our bedroom, right? So that you can set a healthy boundary with your child too. Asking questions like, where do babies come from? Or what's the difference between boys and girls? It's totally okay for kids to ask these kinds of questions. It doesn't mean anything bad, and it's okay to answer them in age-appropriate ways. So also some exploratory play, like playing doctor, for example, with peers of a similar age can be normal, but it's really important to ask kids, how did the play make them feel? Was everybody okay with it? Did everybody agree to it? And then crushes at almost any age are also usually very normal. So a question I like to ask sometimes, just to get people thinking, right? If your first grader tells you that they played doctor with a friend, right? How would you respond? What would you say, right? And we can talk about this at the end too, but Peggy, do you have any thoughts about how you might respond if a child said that to you?
It depends on the situation, what's happening, right? Looking at the bigger picture. So if it's my child, I have a kindergartner. So if she tells me she played doctor with a friend, I'd want to know, what does that mean? What exactly did that, who was doctor and who was the patient, and what happened, and tell me what body parts were you checking for, or what happened, right, during that interaction, to better understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, right? You want to explore with curiosity, right? Don't jump to a conclusion, freak out, right? Like I like that example in that first video we watched, right? Where the parents are like, you what, right? You're gay, or whatever, right? The issue is, what? You played doctor, right? Just explore with curiosity. Oh yeah, what did that mean, right? Who was doctor? Who was patient? What did you check for, right? Because maybe they were just listening to each other's heartbeats, right? And that's fine. Right? So you want to ask again, right? What happened? Was everybody on board? How did it make you feel? Did it make you feel weird, or did it make you feel okay? So talking a little bit about older kids as well. What if your teen asks you about sex, right? Or what about a preteen? Parents often want to know, like, at what age should we really talk about some of these like deeper kind of topics, and how deep should we go, right? What's age appropriate? And I want to bring our attention a little bit back to that 12 to 17 age that tends to be more vulnerable. And actually, studies show that children under 14 are much, much more receptive to their parents' influence and to information than over 14, which if you have a teenager, you probably know. So really, I think that is an argument to start the conversation earlier, right? Younger, not crazy young, right? And again, we want to keep it age appropriate, but it's okay to talk to your preteens about sex, right? They're probably curious. They want to know. Many parents are worried about them finding out information online, and you should be concerned, right? If you talk about it, you're in more control of the narrative. So I want to talk a little bit about older kids now. So talking to preteens and teens about the new feelings that they may have is important. And here's part of why. Sex education is often very focused on the negative. It can be very focused on things like STIs or just anatomy. And that's important for sure. However, it doesn't really address the good feelings, right? And it's equally important to let older children know that crushes and intimacy can feel good and that their feelings and curiosity is totally normal. So again, right, the more we talk about it with them, the more prepared they are. So just some pointers: try to avoid shame and guilt whenever possible. I know this can bring up a lot of feelings for parents, and sometimes it's embarrassing, right? And kids can be really blunt. They can ask really blunt questions, but just try to normalize healthy behaviors and feelings. Like being curious about sex is actually totally normal. And kids and teens often have a lot of embarrassment, shame, and guilt about these things. So just reassure them that they can come to you with anything, that this is totally okay topic. And again, the more comfortable you can be having this conversation with you, the more comfortable they will be coming to you. So again, if you don't talk to your kids about sex, they will learn from other sources such as friends and social media. And just so you know, kids run into porn online much, much younger than you would want them to, right? So do you want that to be their first impression, or do you want the words that you can choose, right? The things that you can say to be their first impression, right? I hear from kids as young as 6 that they see porn sometimes accidentally, right? Or a friend showed it to them, or an older sibling, or an older cousin, or, you know, whoever, right? Much younger than you would hope. And it's better to have more control over the narrative around sex sooner. So children and teens who understand more about sex are actually much less likely to engage in risky behaviors and usually have sex at a later age. Talking about sex does not make kids more curious. Actually, not knowing about sex makes them more curious. Sometimes parents say to me, well, I'm worried about them knowing about sex because then they'll be curious to try it. Or I'm afraid if they know that it feels good, that they'll want to try it. But actually, a study that was done by RAINN, which is where I've gotten a lot of these statistics, it's a rape and abuse and incest network. They had a 12,000 teenager study done, and they found that teens who had had these kind of conversations with their parents younger were much, much more likely to use a condom the first time they had sex, right? So maybe we don't love the idea of our teenagers having sex, but wouldn't you rather they used a condom? I know I would. So this is why it's important to have this conversation. So having a game plan, right? When we talk to older kids about sex, right? Like talking about birth control, condoms, hormonal birth control, whatever, right? And really having a plan if something bad happens, if abuse happens, if a condom breaks, right? If there's a failure in some kind of birth control. It's better to talk about it ahead of time so that if something does go wrong, your child knows what to expect and isn't terrified to come to you. Right? And it's really important to empower teens, boys, girls, kids of all genders, to say no when they want to, and to say yes when they want to. So it's also good to talk to kids and teens about social media and what they're seeing on the internet, because it may or may not actually be accurate information. And again, wouldn't you rather be the one helping them understand and give context to whatever they're seeing, right? Again, they're seeing porn much younger than you would hope, right? So it's actually better to have this conversation and really give them a conversation about peer pressure and consent. Help them understand that consent is always enthusiastic, right? A maybe is not a yes, right? This is a really important conversation to have with kids, especially when they're getting to that age where they might be wanting to have sex themselves, right? That they never have to do anything to be liked. They never have to say yes when they don't want to. And if it's not an enthusiastic yes, it's not a yes, right? And then again, right, children under 14 are actually usually much more receptive. If you're waiting until they're 16 or older, they're going to be like, whatever, mom, right? They're not going to be as receptive to the conversation, most likely. So this is a video that I like to show parents and teens. I think it's appropriate for preteens as well. It really talks about consent, and it gives the example of consent as tea. So let's watch it.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea. Thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please. That's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, "Do you want tea?" because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, "But you wanted tea last week." Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, "But you wanted tea last night." But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
So that can be a great video to show to teenagers. I think it touches on the topic really well. So a little bit more about some warning signs. When should I be worried, right? And these signs are not all inclusive. And if you are seeing any of this, it doesn't necessarily mean a child has been sexually abused, but maybe it's a red flag and it's something to keep an eye on, right? Or it's something to talk to them about and ask them more about. So if a child acts afraid of any adult or of being alone with another adult, bedwetting, especially for older children. If a child is afraid of medical care or being alone with a doctor, this one can seem a little counterintuitive. It's even if they were not abused by a doctor. But sometimes kids who have been abused become very frightened when having to be alone with someone like a doctor, for example. If a child or teen behaves or dresses in very sexualized ways that are age inappropriate. Big shifts in mood, being suddenly withdrawn or sullen, or having big panic or rage attacks that seem kind of out of nowhere. Reverting to younger behaviors, such as thumb sucking or soiling themselves. Over or under showering or other changes in hygiene. Again, these are not all inclusive necessarily. These do not absolutely mean sexual abuse has occurred, but if you're seeing these kinds of signs, especially if they've come out of seemingly nowhere, it may be a red flag, something to pay attention to. So if you are worried about a child or teen, then you should talk to the child or teen directly first and ask them what's going on. ask open-ended questions like, is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Is there anything you want to tell me? Right, those types of questions. And take them for an assessment if you're really concerned from a medical team or a professional therapist or psychologist. Some more resources, the Wellness Center at the Malibu Boys and Girls Club, where Peggy and I work. We're always happy to answer questions. Some additional resources include the American Academy of Pediatrics. They have a wonderful library, and also RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. They also have a lot of information and statistics about how to get help if you're worried about a child in your life. And that's the end of the presentation. If anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Maria. I'm going to leave this slide up for a minute in case anyone needs this information. You can also find it on our website, which you can see is up at the top under bgcmalibu.org/wellness-center. So I do see a couple of, well, let's see, there's a question here. So I'm going to go ahead and share the question with you, Maria, and then you can go ahead and answer, respond. So one of our participants has said, do you have any recommendations for books, resources for Where Do Babies Come From for a 7 and 9-year-old?
That's a great question. I can't think of a book name off the top of my head right now, but I bet you could find a bunch of them with a quick Google search, right? I would look up like top 10 maybe recommended books on Amazon or something like that about this topic, specifically maybe even about like body autonomy, or you can even find, I would search that question, right? Where do babies come from for kids? Book recommendations.